South Africa, but also to Zambia, Botswana, Mozambique, Angola, etc. And in truth, the web is the main tool that Zimbabweans in their diaspora use to keep up with each other and to keep informed. It is a very dispiriting and demoralizing thing to be forced into exile by a cruel regime, and to be able to keep your spirits up and to somehow engineer the political will to effect change against all odds. These kind of tools have become very important. Likewise with Twitter pages. Again, not a great deal of followers or many people, but every day another 10, another 20, another 50 come on to it. And I think you will see this Twitter page going from a few hundred to a few thousand to many, many thousand, because the immediacy, this is Roy Bennett's release just last week, becomes very, very powerful. You also see the sophisticated use, a la America and Obama, of interactive graphics, because the web is very powerful for interactivity. You can embed links, you can put things. You can click on any one of those little icons, and it will take you to a personal report about violence. The crosses are where Mugabe's forces have killed people, but there's other things, there's torture, there's abductions, there's all sorts of things in the codes. Who's doing the attacking? Is it the youth militia, the so-called war veterans, ordinary supporters, the army, the police, all coded on a map to report to the world, hopefully to get ready for the International Criminal Court to take some actions, hopefully in our lifetime. But whatever the reason, just to let people know, so that if you are a victim of violence, you know that there's some place where your story can be told and the world can be informed. So again, using the information as a slight deterrent to the abuse of power. So all of this happens. The elections take place in the most appalling context in March last year. No opposition media allowed. Opposition people harassed and detained, the MDC put into all sorts of difficult situations. But people got to vote anyway. People were desperate, they wanted to get rid of this government. And the most remarkable thing happened. Mugabe lost. These are the official results, which came out, as you know, 6 weeks later. But everybody knew the result that night. And the reason we knew, and the reason that Africans in the world knew the result that night, is exactly what happened in Ghana. Remember, this is in time sequence before Ghana. Parallel voter tabulation. The MDC went to all 9,000 polling booths. This was not a sample, not a random sample, 1 in 23, the way it was in Ghana. This was all the polling booths. And the one small little concession that our then President Thabo Mbeki managed to get out of Mugabe was to say that at the polling booth, before you put the boxes of votes in the truck to send it to Harare for counting, also known as rigging, you will announce the local election results as in Ghana, as in many places. So you must do the counting and you must announce it. Then you can put it in the truck. And the MDC and the NGOs, under great threats to their lives, collated that. Within 1 hour of the election closing that night, everybody knew that Mugabe not only had lost, but had lost by more than 50%. And more so, ZANU-PF, almost all the senior leadership was wiped out. They all lost their seats. In fact, 2/3 of the cabinet ministers did not even win their seat. They were not even coming back to the parliament. We knew all of that. And because Mugabe knew that, that's why they took 6 weeks to do the polls. And they finally came out with 47.9, which is only 2% less than the NGOs had said, and only 3% less than what the MDC themselves have said. But critically, you can see it's below 50. And the reason for the 6 weeks was to reimpose the terror, to reimpose the abductions and the violence, etc. To even attack the opposition, the leader of the opposition, to have them beaten, to really get out there and make sure that this result is not repeated. And what they do is that they announce a law to say, we are not going to be posting the election results outside the polling booth because it was abused and people cheated, and the election officer, they arrest many thousands of election officers who happen to have been put there because they were loyal to ZANU-PF, but they get arrested anyway, and some of them beaten, tortured, and killed. So the levels of violence that take place are extreme. So in the second round, after 6 weeks of violence and terror, and after Morgan Tsvangirai actually pulled out a week before because the violence was just getting too insane, you can see that all of a sudden Robert Mugabe gets 85% of the vote, and more people vote for him in the second round than the entire number of people that voted for both candidates in the first round. Now, it's interesting that a dictator as brutal and as demented as Robert Mugabe still feels the need to go through with the elections to try and have the legitimacy that the election process confers. But this time, there wasn't that independent parallel voter tabulation around. So that is, in a sense, a story of two elections. And I just want to, by the way of extended conclusion, in the precisely 7 minutes that I have left, I have 4 different timers here, including, and my watch is the 5th. So 7 minutes left to say there's a big question as African countries are becoming more democratic, and as Africa's internet connections are growing and growing exponentially, and as cell phone use in Africa is soaring and taking off, we are talking about half of the African adult population in March 2009 having a cell phone. 2/3 of the African population will have a cell phone in their pockets, on them, and be able to use it by 2012. If you put all of that together, is there a link? More internet connectivity, more democracy, more cell phones. What is the link? And where does that, what is that link about? The answer is, of course, there's a link. But before we look at that link, let's just look very briefly at some of the context of how that link takes place. I think the first thing to see is that in 1991, there are only 7 or 8 democracies in Africa. By 2006, that number is getting up to 35. This is progress. This is significant progress. My own country is liberated only in 1994 from colonialism. So as colonialism is defeated, and as democracies are instated, and countries that originally were decolonized, like Ghana in the 50s, and then went through a series of military coups, Nigeria as well, returning to democracy. This democracy is also deeper. This is the Freedom House average. Number 7 is no democracy. Number 1 is perfect democracy. You can see Africa slowly from 1973 to 2008 has moved from 5.4 to 4.3. This is about all the institutions that the director spoke about, in terms of the judiciary, in terms of the freedom of the press, in terms of the independence of elections. So democracy is deepening, but you can also see that the green countries there in Africa are the ones that are largely democratic. And there's not a lot of green in Africa. And in fact, there's not a lot of green in other parts of the world. So we still have a long way to go. Internet penetration in Africa is still tiny and very, very small. Only 5% of people have access to the internet compared to the rest of the world and the world average of 23. So there is a long way to go, and we are very behind in that regard. And if one looks just at this graph here, you will see that the top 10 African countries in terms of internet connectivity, right at the top there, Egypt, Nigeria, and Morocco, are all around 10%. It is still an elite activity